and it really didn't matter how I felt because I'm working as a conduit for the rest of America. And I remember, like, I don't think it truly hit me, the gravity of everything, until maybe a week after I got back home. Like, I think I just kept going straight off adrenaline. Like, it was no like, hey, I remember having brief conversations with my wife, and it was all in the context of, and I'm just gonna be really real with you. What do I say on air if he doesn't make it? What do I say if he's brain dead?
Mm.
These are things that, like, I've got to prep myself for. So that's the emotional part of it, but it's also the job part of it. Like, I have to, like, if that happens, if we get a notification there, I can't be like, oh man, I've got to go.
Welcome to the Raw Facts podcast. I'm your host and producer, Ben Arthur, joined by my good friend Cam Wolfe. He is a national NFL reporter for the NFL Network, someone I've known for a minute. He's been super helpful to me in my own personal career, but for a lot of you football fans out there, you probably recognize him because his face is on TV a lot these days. Cam, thanks so much for being on the show. How's everything going?
It's good, man. It's good. Glad to be on here with you. It's our official off season if we
For
have one.
sure. Yep.
And so just talk a little ball, talk a little life.
Definitely, definitely. And Cam, I like to kind of start at the beginning with my guests. I know you're from Mississippi, from the Jackson area in particular. What do you remember about your childhood in Jackson, Mississippi?
Yeah, good question. Let's take it back. Jacktown, that's where I was born, out in the SIP, and I only lived there for about 8 years, but that's really where a lot of my roots are. I still have grandparents and cousins and aunts who live there to this day. And the biggest thing about me growing up, I was a country kid.
Hmm.
I'm telling you, as country as you think a guy could be, that was me. We used to walk around all through the streets with no shoes on, just had the biggest country accent, completely different than how I speak today and maybe how I interact, but it still bleeds through me, through and through. The Southern food, I still eat a bunch of it. I still listen to the music. Big Chris, my favorite artist, he's a Mississippi guy, and so a lot of
Okay.
those were my roots. But the biggest thing was like that's what created my personality and my upbringing of who I am. Some of my early memories of like sports were in Mississippi, and they used to call me Stat Boy, because I used to always have the stats ready. Whether I was in Mississippi or eventually I moved to Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and then eventually to the Philly area. Always, I used to come into the barbershop and I was ready with some stats. NFL, NBA, they get in an argument back then. It might be, okay, who's better, Carmelo Anthony or LeBron James, and I'd be coming through with some stats to tell you why LeBron's better than Carmelo. And that was really my upbringing. My grandparents really always used to have the newspaper, and that was something that I got attached to early. And so I used to always read the newspaper, and it wasn't a cartoon section; it was a sports section. And
Mm,
so they'll tell stories to their friends about me being at 2, 3, 4 years old, reading the sports section instead of the cartoons. And
mm.
that's probably my entryway into sports being essentially my life. And then later I played sports, and then it became clear I wasn't going to play in the league, and I wasn't going to play very long, and so I chose this career. But everything kind of points back to the SIP, for me, and where I got started.
And Cam, you've been covering the NFL for a minute now. You're at NFL Network now. You cover the NFL for ESPN, the Broncos, Titans, and then at the Denver Post, you're at the Denver Post as well. What's maybe your favorite part about covering the NFL, or what's most fulfilling to you about being able to do what you do?
Yeah, I love the stories, man. Like being able to build relationships with players, and not like, I know fans always come to me like, oh, it's cool that you know Patrick Mahomes, or Derrick Henry, or Trevor Lawrence. And like for me, yeah, maybe that's cool, and like the 30 years from now I'll tell my grandkids stories about that. But for me, it's like building relationships with these guys like individuals, and being able to tell people unique stories that they don't know about their favorite players or their favorite teams. Being able to tell stories that transcend football. I remember doing a story last year, Thursday Night Football, and it's one of the ones I remember most last year that had nothing to do with the game. Essentially, the Falcons left tackle Jake Matthews was having a baby, and he had flew to Carolina that the day before for the game. His wife went into labor the day of the game. I remember having a conversation with the Falcons head coach Arthur Smith, and he's telling me the details about they're gonna fly Jake back to Atlanta and try to get him there. There was issues with the transportation. He eventually got back there, and he ended up having getting back to Atlanta with the healthy baby, landing about 45 minutes before game time, and played that game. And it was like a cool story inside a story. And I remember being on NFL Network telling that story throughout the day. And to me, that had much more significance than who won the game. I think the Panthers won that game, but who cares, right? The story to me, that's what matters. You know, I was able to tell a story earlier this year about Jalen Waddle and his relationship with a 6-year-old leukemia patient, who's a Dolphins fan, and they connected off the Waddle dance, the Waddle penguin dance, and that really created a bond for them. He's now beat leukemia twice, and he got they essentially said he was cancer free. And as part of the Dolphins, Man of the Year contributions, they actually sent him and his family to the Super Bowl. So it's like a cool community story, but it told the bond and the relationships that a player can have on a community, a team can have on a community. Those are the things I'm going to remember, not who won the Week 12 game between the Titans and the Jags. And so those are the things that get me excited to go to work every day.
Now, was that always the case that you were the most excited to tell those kinds of stories? Because you mentioned how, as a kid, you were kind of like the nerd, like you
Yeah.
knew kind of the stats, analytics, so to speak, and now as you're kind of in your career, you find the most fulfillment in telling the stories of who these guys are outside of football or between the
Absolutely.
lines or what have you. As was that always the case, or was there a point at which you realize, this is more impactful for me to tell these pieces?
Yeah, good question, Ben. I think that it evolved as I grew into this industry, right? Like, I got into this industry because I'm a football fan and I love football and I know football. And I wanted to get closer to the game, right? And so for me early on, it was very much about the game, and it still is. Like, I still watch football games and get very much excited about what's going to happen, who's scoring that touchdown, who's getting the interception, who's the best team. I get in arguments with the best of them about different elements of football. But as I tried to evolve, like who I am as a journalist, I always kept thinking of what impact am I making, right? And so, like, although I enjoy football like many fans, as my job as a storyteller, as a reporter, I think I have to pull back the curtain. And so, me telling you, who won the game or how this quarterback, did, or that's part of it. But to me, that's a small part of it. That's something that a lot of people can do at home. What they can't do is learn a little bit about these people that I cover on a regular basis. So I think once I understood that, and I kept asking myself, because we cover sports, right? It's a game, essentially a child's game. And so I always ask myself, how can I make an impact on people beyond these 3 hours they're watching this game? And for me, it's the stories, the memories, the overall feelings they are left with about the people that are in the game they love so much.
Now, Cam, what is maybe the story you did, or I don't know, story you reported on, or maybe even a story you broke in the NFL space that in your head, it was kind of like your I made it moment? Do you have a piece like that? And if so, what was it?
Yeah, I don't know if it was my I made it moment. I probably had one of those earlier, but the one I always remember is this past year covering Damar Hamlin, and him nearly dying on the field and being, revived, essentially 3 days later coming back to life. And I was on the ground for that story, and it really was a lesson to me in this job of it's never mundane, right? I was covering this game that was Bills Bengals, and it was supposed to be. I was hyping this up as potential game of the year. We got Josh Allen and Joe Burrow. These guys have never played each other, but they have a relationship, and they're two of the top three quarterbacks in the AFC. And the game became very secondary very quickly. It was looked like a very innocuous hit, but it ended up leaving the guy, dead on the field, and it was scary. It was something where, like, I was very much challenged between my personal emotion and also being able to say, I've got to tell this story. How can I do this in a way where I do not have myself in the story, my emotion in the story, but I can still give people the raw updates they need? Because if you remember, there was a lot of silence from everyone involved the first 24, 48, even 72 hours. And so I was really the only reporter, I mean, the only voice in my outlet. And ESPN had a reporter as well, Coley Harvey, who did a great job. And there was a couple local outlets as well. But we were essentially the only voices updating America with what's going on with Damar Hamlin until eventually the Bills came out and started to release statements of their own. And the hospital kind of put some things out as well, 3 or 4 days in. But that story will forever be with me. Waking up 6 a.m. for Good Morning Football every day, being out there to probably about 8 9 p.m. And just not really knowing what's going to happen and trying to prepare yourself for every element of the story, making sure that you do everything right because this is a story that's involving life and death. And so everybody wants answers, but I can only provide you with what I'm able to gather. The context I'm able to get from developing relationships with his family and trust there. The information I'm getting from teammates who trust me to give out their perspective as well. And so that story I think is probably the biggest story I've covered in my career, and it's the one I'll remember the most. I've had others previously that probably got
Mhm.
me more on the national scene, but that's the one when you say what's the story, that's probably the one I'll still point to 5 or 10 years from now.
So being in that, Cam, I mean, obviously it's a really kind of big moment. I bet there was some kind of sense of kind of the gravity of the moment, the gravity of the kind of story you were telling in that moment. But what was it like for you? As you said, you had to balance your personal emotions of kind of what you were seeing with the fact that you knew you had a job to do. What was it like for you being able to compartmentalize
Compartmentalize, yeah,
that
it's a hard word.
and be able to do your job in such a big moment?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the first 20 minutes, I was just in shock. Like, I was just like watching everybody else, just watching, trying to get the reactions of other people and see what's going on. And then after that, I tried to tell myself, hey, it's time to go. It's just like any other a player, right? You have to react. I almost felt like a backup quarterback, so to speak. Like it's weird the way my job works. I do a lot of coverage during pregame, and then once the game is going on, I'm just watching as a spectator. And eventually after the game, I'll do a post game interview, sometimes a post game report. But during the game, I'm just like much of you guys, like I'm watching. And so immediately then I had to get thrown into the action, and it really didn't matter how I felt because I'm working as a conduit for the rest of America. And I remember, like, I don't think it truly hit me the gravity of everything until maybe a week after I got back home. Like, I think I just kept going straight off adrenaline. Like, it was no like, hey, I remember having brief conversations with my wife, and it was all in the context of, and I'm just gonna be really real with you. What do I say on air if he doesn't make it? What do I say if he's brain dead?
Mm.
These are things that like I've got to prep myself for. So that's the emotional part of it, but it's also the job part of it. Like I have to like if that happens, if we get a notification there, I can't be like, oh man, and start, I've got to go. I've got to go. And so God willing, there was a big breakthrough that he was able to not only be okay, not only live, not only be fully healthy, but now it looks like he's going to play football again, which is
Yeah,
tremendous to think about. 4 months ago, we were, wondering if he would be able to be the same human. And so I think for me, emotions didn't really hit until a week later. I just went off adrenaline.
I feel that. And Cam, you're a father, of course. Your young daughter Layla, who I've had the opportunity to meet, sweet, cutest little thing ever. But I'm curious, has in what ways has maybe being a father now changed, or maybe even just enhanced the way you attack your job and attack your career?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is you have more people to work for, right? Like I was always motivated, like myself. Like I always had a vision of what my life would look like, my career would look like, and I was always self motivated. But when in those moments where I don't have that motivation, I look to my obligation, and my obligation is take care of my family, take care of my wife, take care of my daughter, and those are elements that prevent me from getting complacent or prevent me from saying, I'm gonna relax a little bit. I don't need to. I had a good year. Next year doesn't have to be that great. Like I always got to be hungry, because this, Ben. There's always somebody that's coming for your job. There's always somebody that's coming to do what you do, and I've got to protect what's the food on my plate so that I can give the food to my daughter, to my wife. And so I think that it changes from that perspective. And then I think on a purely emotional level, like I think that is one of the coolest things is my wife does a great thing where she likes to record my daughter when she's seeing me on TV. And she gets the most colorful reactions, like just see her dad doing this. And for me, whenever I get to like, oh, I'm just going to work, I'm just going to job, like I'm reminded that like my daughter gets to see me on TV, like for like that's her life. And so she's gonna remember that. Like I think that's such a cool element, and it keeps me going to put my best out there, to put my focus out there, knowing that she's watching in some capacity. So yeah, those are the elements that I think really stand out to me, and then overall it challenges me time wise because one thing that we don't talk about a lot is we travel a lot with this job, and so I
Mhm.
constantly have to balance the work life balance of my family with my career. And so it when I'm thinking about my work, I'm thinking about the time I am away from my family. And so it's important for me to maximize what I'm doing, or else what am I doing? You know,
Yeah.
so that's the way I think about it.
Cam, there are so many intriguing storylines in the NFL this upcoming season. Chiefs obviously won the Super Bowl. Again, we had the two black quarterbacks in the Super Bowl for the first time. We entered 2023. I feel like black quarterbacks have never maybe been at a better place in this league. You think about Lamar getting paid, Jalen Hurts getting paid. Three of the top four picks in the draft were black quarterbacks. We know how loaded the AFC is. Aaron Rodgers is with the Jets. So many different storylines going on in the league right now. Being in your role as a national guy with the NFL Network, what's maybe the storyline that you're most excited about following as we kind of get uh, closer to the 2023 season?
Yeah, first I want to address what you just said. I think that's like super important of a time period we are. Like, there's still a lot of growth to go, but the evolution of the black quarterback. Jason Reed, a good friend of mine, actually wrote this um, book of the rise of the black quarterback. That's a really good book. He didn't know I was going to pub him, but it's really
Free
it's
plug.
really and what it means for America. And he wrote this before we saw Patrick Mahomes and Jalen Hurts in the Super Bowl. And I think it's really impactful because there was a time when black quarterbacks were forced to change position because athletic quarterbacks were not the in vogue. You had to stand and win inside the pocket, right? And there's some coaches that still have that old school mindset, but I think what you're seeing is a shift of the style of quarterbacks that are needed to win in the NFL. Patrick Mahomes, Jalen Hurts, you mentioned Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, heck, Anthony Richardson drafted in Indianapolis. These are quarterbacks who 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago may have been, second day, third day, maybe switch position type players because they're not traditional passers. They're not natural pocket passing quarterbacks. Now you're seeing it where the statue quarterbacks are becoming more out of the game than the mobile quarterbacks. And I think that's
Hmm.
great for the league. So I'm excited to see that continue to evolve. But I'm also interested to see, you mentioned sort of the landscape of quarterbacks. I don't know if we've ever had a more um, uh, topsy turvy uh, divisional situation with the quarterbacks. I think there's probably 9 or 10 AFC quarterbacks that are probably in the top 12 of quarterbacks, and maybe 2 or 3 in the NFC. And it
It's
creates
insane.
such a crazy race for AFC playoff races that I think there's going to be a lot of teams and quarterbacks at home disappointed. I mean, you mentioned like Lamar Jackson just got paid and NFL's highest paid quarterback. He might be sixth, seventh on a lot of people's list, right? Which is
Crazy.
unreal. The
Yeah.
dude's won an MVP. But then you think, okay, well, we got Patrick Mahomes, we got Joe Burrow, we got Josh Allen, we got Justin Herbert, we got Trevor Lawrence behind me who's been balling, Aaron Rodgers just got traded to the Jets. And that's all before you get to, Lamar Jackson on some people's list. And then you still have, you know, Deshaun Watson, you still got Tua Tagovailoa, Russell Wilson. I mean, that's just 10 quarterbacks to me. And I mean, Jalen Hurts would be in that mix. But beyond that, the NFC does not have that. I mean,
Yeah.
Dak Prescott maybe. We'll see, what Bryce Young eventually brings there, but it's just such a drastic difference. So I'll be interested to see that as well. That'll be something intriguing. And then we talked about this off air. I think for the first time in a long time, the AFC South is maybe a top two, three division as far as interest, at least to me.
Hmm.
And I think it's because of those rookie quarterbacks that were drafted to those teams. I can't wait to see Anthony Richardson in Indy. Like, I got a chance to be with him a lot this offseason. I wrote a feature about him for NFL.com. And I think that he's just one of the most unique talents that we've ever seen come into this league. Now, he has some development to be done, but if he gets it right, he could be a guy that we're talking about amongst the top
100%.
group
Yeah.
within 2 3 years. And then we got CJ Stroud in Houston, right? Right in the same division. He's going to be a guy that's consistently measured against Bryce Young. Was he the right pick at one? Should you have gone with a bigger quarterback? Can he revive the Houston franchise that, quite frankly, has been, off of national radar since they traded Deshaun Watson? So that's interesting to me. And then Tennessee is in a very precarious spot because it's a team that just hired a new GM and Rand Carthon, who is starting to build things his way. He tore down the offensive line, got very old there. There's a lot of question marks about the longevity of Derrick Henry and Ryan Tannehill there. And then you draft Will Levis in the second round. And so that team itself is going to be a very interesting team. Maybe mid-season, they're going to have some questions to make about what the structure is for this team long term. And the other element is there. People just say, "Oh, well, you just retool." Mike Vrabel isn't a rebuild type coach.
Yeah.
It's not built that way, and
Yeah.
so they're going to have some interesting questions there. And they're a team that quietly has been, before last year, dominating this AFC South. And so, are we seeing a changing of the guard? So, to me, those are a couple of the storylines I get really excited about. And the other division to me is the AFC East. You look at Aaron Rodgers coming into that adds new life to what had essentially become a two-team division between the Bills and the Dolphins. Now it's a three-team division. The Patriots, the fourth team in that division. Bill Belichick, the last time he finished last in the division was 2000, which was early Brady Belichick era. So
Yeah.
that division to me, along with the AFC South, are two of the most intriguing to watch.
Yeah, there's a lot of fun that we're in for in the NFL, and I can't wait for it this upcoming season. But back to you, Cam. I know that, I mean, we've had a lot of conversations in the past, and I know something that you've said is growing up, you always wanted to be on TV talking football, but
Yeah,
now you're doing that at a high level, and
thank
people who follow the NFL know who you are. But now that you are doing what you wanted to as a child, what's next for you? You're that guy on TV talking football. So what's next for Cam Wolfe?
Yeah, I think the big thing for me is there's a lot of people who helped me get to where I am. Like, I'm 30 years old, but I remember when I was 21, 22, and I was just trying to get a job anywhere, Wyoming, West Virginia, wherever they would hire me. I'm just trying to get my start. And there were so many people who helped pull me up, Mark Spears, Greg Lee, Josina Anderson, Adam Schefter was a conduit for me early on. Gregory Moore, who was my first editor at the Denver Post, big advocate for me. Scott Monisser gave me my first chance at the Denver Post. Heather Burns hired me at ESPN. John Plume as well. These are people who took a chance on me early on, gave me guidance, gave me nuggets when I didn't have any idea what I was doing. And so as I start to rise, I want to pull up people, especially people who look like me. Like, there's enough room for us to eat in this industry. And so I think for me in the second stage of my career, I want to pull just as many people up as I can. I want to see this industry look a little bit more like me, as far as color, and a little bit less like me as far as sex. More females in this industry, more people of color in this industry. And so that's something that's important to me on a growing journalism perspective, because we need a lot of different perspectives. We learned that during the push for social justice about 5 years ago, where there was a lot of outlets who were struggling to tell the stories of these black and brown athletes who were discussing why they were taking a knee during the anthem, or discussing why protesting police brutality was something that hit them personally, even as $1 million athletes. Like, it did not click for a lot of reporters and outlets. And so I think that woke up a lot of people that, you need a more diverse group in age, in race, and gender, to be able to tell these stories. And I hope we continue to grow that, and I try to do my responsibility there as well. And then I guess on second level, me on a personal level, I think for me, I want to create a platform, a brand where I can be a national voice for every team, and be able to tell the stories that matter on the biggest stages, whether that's Super Bowl, whether that's big features, some of the big storytellers. I want people to come to me and trust me as someone to tell their story, whatever that may be. And so it continued to grow from that. You grow from a individual reporter where you cover one team to covering a larger region, to covering a quarter of the league, and then eventually you get to a point where you have a good grasp of everything. And so for me, it's continuing to build the right way, continuing to build relationships, and then eventually, who knows, eventually maybe there's a platform of my own where I can talk sports or talk stories in a way that I think is natural to me. I don't know if I'll ever be the debate, yelling at somebody person
Stephen
on
A.
my personality. But I think there will be something that is truly me in the future that I think I can grab hold of it. And until then, I'm gonna just continue to chop my wood and go about doing this thing the way I do it.
Love it. And last question for you, Cam, before I let you go. This has been great, by the way, but for those that want to be like Cam Wolfe, for those that see you on TV doing what you do, what advice would you have for those aspiring to get into a position that you've gotten yourself into?
Yeah, great question. It's probably the most common question I get from young people, right? I always tell people, like, my path is not going to be your path. Like, I can tell you exactly step by step what I did to get to Denver Post, to get to ESPN, to get to NFL Network now. And you could do exactly those paths, and it may not work the same way for you. It may take longer. It may not happen at all. But the biggest thing that I think I can tell you is this industry, especially now, is is hungry for people who want to do the job right, and it also gives people an opportunity earlier than maybe in previous times. There used to be a very much wait your turn period in journalism where you had to have 10 years, 15, 20 years of experience to do a particular job. Now companies are realizing that you need younger voices earlier. And so be aggressive. I think you use your social media platforms as your resume, and that could be a very good start for people who are wondering, hey, I'm in high school covering volleyball, how can I get there? Like, look at it as a very linear perspective. Somebody's always watching you. And it's particularly when you think no one else is watching. And I always tell people this: look, I've never, since I got my first job, I haven't applied for a single job that I've got. Every other job I've got has been through somebody recommended me, or somebody saw my work and saw my potential. And so people are watching, and you need to build those relationships with that in mind. And one other nugget, and I say this because it frustrates me as young people, what young people do. When you meet someone that you respect, that you want to um, emulate, like if it's me or Ben or whoever it is, build like meaningful relationships, and follow up on them. A lot of times I meet with people at colleges or high schools, and everybody is so excited to meet me, and they talk to me, and they want to know this and that, and I give them my contact information. Like, I am not shy. If I believe that you can grow, I will give you out my email, my cell phone. And I tell you what, 95% of the time I never hear from those people again. And it's like, I'm not
Facts.
gonna reach
Yeah.
out to you.
Yeah.
Like, I don't need to help you. I want to, but I don't need to. And so that's one thing. I like, be very intentional with relationships, and let me tell you that you're bothering me. Like, don't say, I emailed him, he didn't respond, so I don't want to email again because I'm bothering him. I'm busy, I have a busy life. But if you shoot me a second email, you shoot me a third email, I'm gonna get back with you. And so be very intentional with whatever relationships you're seeking out, and find your personal voice. Like, I had to find that. I'm still ongoing to being authentically me. But I remember, and I'll leave you with this last story, because this can maybe help some people as they go about their journey. You mentioned Denver Post. That was an internship I did when I first got into this thing, part of Sports Journalism Institute, which was a really great program. I'd advise any minorities or women in the newsroom to look it up and apply for it, especially those in your junior or senior year in college. But the reason I mentioned that organization is because they got me into the Denver Post, and I ended up doing the Denver Post job. I ended up getting hired there for my first job out of that internship out of college, being the third Broncos beat reporter. And I was on the job for about a month, 6 weeks. And I remember getting a call from one of my mentors who essentially like asked me about a story I was writing. He said, "Why are you writing like that?" And I was like, "What do you mean?" Like, I'm just trying to, show I belong. And he was like, if they wanted to hire a 50-year-old white dude to do your job, they would have done that. Be you. Find your voice. Find how you write. And I don't say that because of race or anything. I say it because a lot of times we look at around and who is in the industry, and we try to say, hey, I got to do it like him. I got to do it like that person. And you change who you are, and that robs you of what your uniqueness is, what you can bring to an audience, what you can bring as a storyteller. So there's something you can get from, hey, I will learn from this person, I will get tidbits, but don't try to become that person. I made that mistake early, I quickly corrected it, and since then I've tried to be truly, authentically me.
A lot of wisdom there from Mr. Cam Wolfe. Everyone, please be sure to like, share, subscribe to the Raw Facts podcast. Appreciate you guys tuning in and constantly rocking with me. But big thanks to my guest, Cam Wolfe, a good buddy of mine. Thank you for sharing your wisdom. Thank you for sharing your story, and I'll see you soon, bro.
Absolutely, man. Keep doing your thing.
Peace out, guys.